we can look at yoga as a mental discipline. It's also a physical discipline. It's a discipline used for self-transformation. It's a discipline used to enlarge our consciousness, to bring ourselves into a higher plane of consciousness. And you know what's interesting is that that's really the difference between philosophy, or actually, let me start that over. Let me keep philosophy as a word out of it for this moment. It's really the difference between religion and spirituality, because we're talking about transformation. When we talk about personal transformation, we're talking about that word that is also misunderstood, spirituality, personal transformation. And you're doing it. You're transforming yourself through your own efforts. So we're looking at the inside, whereas religion is more about looking to the outside. Someone, hopefully, will save you. But when we look towards spiritual practice, we're not expecting someone out there to save us. It's not about being saved, it's about liberation. We talked about that the first day. What's the word for liberation in this Hindu context? Yes, moksha. Liberation is constant theme. And the yogas aim toward liberation, moksha. That's spirituality, that's spiritual practice. And it means I am looking to myself and my own efforts. I'm looking to the inside. I want to transform myself. I'm not expecting someone to do it for me. You see? And so, this idea of changing the self, transforming the self, that's yoga. But do you know what that means? That means that if a yogi is someone who practices yoga, that anybody can be a yogi, no matter your background, your culture, your religion, your gender. Anybody can be a yogi. It means we can have Christian yogis and Muslim yogis and Hindu yogis and Buddhist yogis. And indeed, a true yogi applies the word in a big way like that. He doesn't draw a line. Paramahansa Yogananda wrote a book about Jesus Christ the yogi. It's a shame that through the centuries of Roman occupation of Europe, what became Christianity became something very much changed from Jesus' original practice. But he was very much yogic in his spiritual practice. And so, to keep us on point, that word yogi describes someone with such a spiritual practice. And there have been mystics in every tradition, the Sufis, the Taoists, in the hills above the Yangtze River in China. They're yogis, they're all yogis. Because they're transforming themselves. So calling the self together, calling the self into focus, uniting with the divine, that's very much the Hindu sense of the word yoga. All of that describes yoga. And so in the context of Hinduism, the word yoga refers to any of many accepted paths to self-realization. That's the point. Yoga refers to any of the many multifaceted paths that lead to self-realization. And Hinduism is so diverse. They're all accepted. It's multifaceted. They're all held together under the umbrella term, which is Hinduism. But all of these different paths are like little religious practices in their own right, all aiming toward moksha. In the Gita, you have reference to all of these yogas, plus more. They're mentioned in the Upanishads. All of the scriptures, in some way or another, touch on these different paths. Any questions about that word yoga, at least up to this point, according to what I've already said up to this point? first yoga I have on the board is Raja Yoga, the royal path. It means royal. It's interesting because although Raja Yoga as a complex system wasn't really ironed out, until well into the Middle Ages, or even the 15th century, the Gita, possibly written before the time of Christ, talked a whole lot about Raja Yoga. At least insofar as it instructed on the ways of meditation, because that's what Raja Yoga focuses on, meditation. Raja Yoga is known today as the yoga of Patanjali. Have you heard of Patanjali? Anybody who's practiced the physical yoga that I've talked about knows of Patanjali. It's a name you should know, Patanjali. Patanjali. Patanjali's royal path. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. You've heard of the Yoga Sutras, perhaps. That's Patanjali. And in your book, and I forget what page, I want to say 90 and 99, there's a little special box with the 8 steps of yoga. Did you come across that in your reading? Maybe someone can feed me the page so I can say it out loud. 92? Yeah. So on 92, there's a little special box with the 8 steps. The 8 steps of what? Does it mention Patanjali? Yes. So it's right there. Patanjali's 8 steps of yoga. So Raja Yoga is what I want to focus on now. And the 8 steps that are part of Patanjali's Raja Yoga. That's what I want to focus on. I mean, what is it? Sometimes I think, or I worry that you're taking notes without really processing. What is it that's really behind this information? Okay, 8 steps, good, let's get them. And we're so busy with trivialities of enumeration. Okay, number 1, blah, blah, blah. But wait a second. Here's what matters. What's the idea behind it? We're so focused on memorization and regurgitation and taking tests in that way. And what's the study guide? And da-da-da-da. But do you know what? If you understand the idea behind it, you don't forget it. It becomes less something to memorize and more something that you simply know. It's crystallized in your brain. What's the idea behind it? It's a recipe for how to live in the world peacefully, without fighting against everything and everybody. That's what it is. And the 8 steps are the little instructions that we use as guidelines. Now I have to say something. Patanjali's 8 steps of yoga were influenced directly by Buddhism. Patanjali existed after the time of Buddha. And so when we get to Buddhism, you're going to notice, oh wow, what a coincidence that Buddha gives us his 8 noble path, his 8-fold noble path. Patanjali gives us 8 steps. That's weird. Well, there's a lot of crossover, and you're right to notice it. It's well noted that he was influenced by Buddha's 8-fold noble path. But it stands in its own right, and it lives in its own spirit and in its own context, and deserves to be looked at independently as Raja Yoga, as this path leading us toward moksha. In this spiritual land called India. So the 8 steps are right there in your book for you to review on your own, but it's in a little, thumbnail sketch.